On Dragonstone, the Targaryens were the last pure remnants of a once magnificent empire, the Valyrian Freehold. Their home was destroyed in the Doom of Valyria, so wherever the Targaryens went after, they were forever refugees, displaced from the capital of their sorcery and dragons that had lived for over 5,000 years.
We don't belong here.
Valyria is gone, we don't belong anywhere.
Valyria was an advanced city, home to esoteric knowledge and power that were lost after the Doom. Slowly, the Targaryens on Dragonstone and King's Landing tried their best to rediscover and relearn whatever ancestral knowledge they felt was owed to them. They were the last living heirs to a smoking volcanic ruin that had once been home to fused black stone towers piercing the sky, inhabited by over 40 rivaling families of dragonlords. The Targaryens were never the most powerful when Valyria was at its height, but on Dragonstone, they are the last dragonlords, the most powerful beings on the planet. For 100 years after the Doom, called the Century of Blood, the Targaryen family rebuilt their house on Dragonstone, off the eastern coast of the squabbling kings of Westeros. Finally, in the year 27 BC, 75 years after the Doom, Lord Aegon Targaryen and his wife, Lady Valyna Velaryon, gave birth to a king, Aegon. Aegon was the second child and only son of Aegon Targaryen. It is said that during the Century of Blood, when Lords Aenar, Daemon, Aegon, Maegor, Aerys, Aelix, Baelon, and Daemon ruled Dragonstone, the Targaryens still had their sights set to the east. 5 dragons flew to Dragonstone with Aenar the Exile in 114 BC, but we don't know if any of these predecessors of Aegon ever used the 5 dragons in Essos and tried to rebuild the Valyrian Freehold. The only known surviving dragonlord of the Doom, other than the Targaryens, was a guy called Orion, and he did try to rebuild the Freehold. In 102 BC, shortly after the Doom, Orion was in Qohor, the sinister city and the easternmost daughter of Valyria. It was here in Qohor that Orion proclaimed himself Emperor of Valyria, laid claim to the Freehold, and raised a force of 30,000 men to march on the ruins he once called home. However, Orion, his great dragon, and all of his army were never seen again after they vanished in the smoking sea of chaos that now ruled Valyria. Perhaps the tale of Orion reached the Targaryens on Dragonstone, and they decided not to go back home. So the Lords of Dragonstone, including Aegon's father, Aerion, cemented themselves as a premier power on the Narrow Sea, with the help of the famous Valyrian fleet. The Valyrians had grown rich on Driftmark, as had the Celtigars of Claw Isle, so Aegon Targaryen and the unnamed Lord Valyrian of the Tides likely worked together on the economy of the Narrow Sea, profiting off the trade from the free cities and the ports of Westeros. As he came of age, Aegon Targaryen took his older sister Visenya to wife, as was Valyrian custom. It was not Valyrian custom to take 2 wives, but Aegon did so anyway, and he married his younger sister Rhaenys as well. The histories say that Aegon married Visenya out of duty and Rhaenys out of love. Aegon's polygamous marriage would later inspire the likes of Maegor the Cool, who surpassed Aegon and married 6 women instead of 2. And of course, Show Daemon tries to convince Viserys to let him marry Rhaenyra, despite his already being married to Rhea Royce, because the Conqueror did it.
That didn't stop Aegon the Conqueror from taking a second wife.
You are no conqueror. You are a plague.
Of the 5 dragons who flew to Dragonstone with Aenar, only Balerion the Black Dread remained, so Aegon bonded with him. Visenya bonded with Vhagar, and Rhaenys bonded with Meraxes. Both dragons were of a capable fighting size, but were younger and were hatched on Dragonstone after the Doom during the Century of Blood. The young trio of dragon riders actually visited Westeros well before the Conquest. In their youth, Aegon and Visenya visited the citadel of Oldtown, went hawking on the Arbor as guests of Lord Redwine, and perhaps visited Lannisport as well. Oldtown and Lannisport were the 2 greatest cities in Westeros at the time, and likely inspired a young Aegon, who went on to establish King's Landing. After Aegon visited Westeros and was Lord of Dragonstone in his own right, he had the famous painted table crafted, which we see in both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. The painted table is a 50-foot long slab of wood, probably driftwood, which was common along the Narrow Sea. The throne of House Valyrian is the Driftwood Throne. The table was carved into a very accurate shape of Westeros, so Aegon likely consulted maps, texts, or perhaps even maesters, as well as his own traveling experience, to get the table as realistic as possible. It includes all the major rivers and woods and towns and castles of Westeros. Funnily enough, the table in House of the Dragon shows Summerhall, a vacation castle of the Targaryen family, which hadn't been built at the time of the Conquest, or the dance. It was built during the reign of King Daeron II, who began his rule in 184 AC. So Aegon was about 2 centuries too early on that one. So the logical question becomes, why was the painted table made? As George R.R. Martin wrote in Fire and Blood in 2018, plainly, Aegon's interest in Westeros long predated the events that drove him to war. The Targaryens had stopped looking east. Aegon and his sisters traveled Westeros and met with some of its lords, and Aegon had a geographically accurate table map created for Dragonstone. Clearly, it wasn't just for decoration, it was for planning. Before House of the Dragon, most fans believed that Aegon simply took Westeros because he could, because he had 3 dragons, a strong ally in the Valyrians, and an older sister who was a fierce warrior and warmonger, likely influencing him. Well, as King Viserys says, ambition alone is not what drove Aegon to conquest. Before the conquest, Aegon had a dragon dream, a prophetic vision of a cold, dark threat in the distant north. Aegon dreamed of a cataclysmic threat which would spell the doom of his people. That's now 2 Targaryens who dreamt of a horrific disaster coming in the future, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Remember, at this point in history, the only surviving remnants of Valyria are Aegon and his sisters. Not only was the freehold demolished, but they were 3 untimely deaths away from the final eradication of the race of High Valyrians. Or of dragonlords, at least. Volantis is the oldest, largest, proudest, and richest of the free cities of Essos. Located just north of the ruins of Old Valyria, the eastern part of Volantis is inhabited by the precious few who can prove direct lineage to the old blood of Valyria. These wealthy aristocrats get to live behind fused black stone walls and run the scene from their labyrinth of palaces, courtyards, towers, and temples. Volantis was the first colony of the Freehold, the eldest daughter of Valyria. After the Doom, the Volantines with the Old Blood laid claim to the Empire and considered themselves the heirs to the Freehold. Towards the end of the Century of Blood, the 2 leadership factions of Volantis, known as the Tigers and the Elephants, emerged. The Tigers wanted to achieve conquest through warfare, while the Elephants wished to achieve economic conquest through trade. The Tigers held the majority, so they went to war against the free cities of Lys and Myr, adding them to their new empire.
Your new empire?
They faced resistance from the alliance of Tyrosh and Pentos, and then the Sea Lord of Braavos sent ships in aid of Lys. At the apex of the conflict, the Storm King of Westeros, Argilac Durrandon, joined the fray against Volantis, crushing a massive Volantine army in the disputed lands. Finally, Lord Aegon Targaryen of Dragonstone put this foolish squabbling to rest once and for all. Dragonstone allied with Pentos and Tyrosh, and Aegon flew on Balerion the Black Dread to Lys, where he burned a fleet of Volantine warships. This is what Prince Reggio of Pentos was talking about to Daemon in episode 6 of House of the Dragon.
Aid Pentos in this, as Aegon once did.
The young Lord of Dragonstone was clearly quick to action, not one for dithering. He had a dragon, after all. Why should he be afraid? He had the dragons, not the Volantine nobles who lay claim to the freehold. Aegon put those nobles behind their fused blackstone wall back in their place. Only a dragonlord was fit to conquer. It's unclear whether those with the old blood in Volantis even could bond with a dragon, but Aegon was determined not to allow them a chance to try. By the time of Aegon's dream, he was a known threat to the world. He crushed Volantis' attempt to reforge the Empire of Valyria. He likely met King Argilac Durrandon during the fighting, or sometime after, because one day, the Storm King sent a raven to Lord Aegon, offering a marriage alliance. Aegon would wed Argilac's daughter, Argella, and for her dowry, Aegon would gain all the land north of the Stormlands and east of the Riverlands, now known simply as the Crown Lands. This wasn't even Argilac's land to give. He just wanted a buffer zone between his Stormlands and the Iron King Harrenhal's Riverlands. Well, Aegon already had 2 wives, his sisters, so a 3rd wife would be excessive. Lord Aegon sent a messenger back to Storm's End with a counteroffer. Instead of Aegon, his best friend and probably half-brother, Orys Baratheon, would wed Argella in exchange for the land. Argalactorandon was not a smart man, and he chose to wake the dragon.
You don't want to wake the dragon, do you?
He cut off the messenger's hands and sent them in a box back to Dragonstone. It was a dragonlord he wanted for his daughter's husband, not a bastard named Baratheon. Irony alert, Orys Baratheon would then go on to kill Argalactorandon in single combat, marry his daughter anyway, and then live in his house and steal his sigil. This was presumably the final straw for Lord Aegon, who would be a lord no longer. Given what little we actually know about Aegon and his sister's personalities, he may have been wavering on how to act on his dragon dream. Standing over the painted table, he must have agonized over whether or not he should simply up and conquer the entirety of Westeros, or to offer terms and an audience with each king and queen, or to push Westeros aside for now and focus on cementing his family's position on Dragonstone. At this time, Aegon had no heir to succeed him should he fall in battle. His altercation with the Storm King meant the conquest starts now. No more Mr. Nice Dragon. These are the so-called events that drove him to war. But thanks to Viserys' exposition dump in the House of the Dragon premiere, we know that Aegon would have unified Westeros in some way, whether or not Argalactorandon was mean to him. When a Targaryen has a dragon dream about everyone literally dying, you get moving. You can check out my video on Aegon's prophecy I made a few months ago, where I go into more detail on Aegon's dream and what it means for the Targaryen family, and even the implications for House Stark up north. Essentially, Aegon had a dynasty-defining dream on par with that of Daenys the Dreamer, his ancestor who dreamt of the doom of Valyria. This prophecy would go on to define the true reason behind Aegon's conquest, as well as the reigns of certain Targaryen kings after him. In House of the Dragon, the dream is a big deal to Jaehaerys, Viserys, and now Rhaenyra.
A song of ice and fire.
Kings Baelor I, Aerys I, Aegon IV, and Aegon V were also inspired by historical prophecies about dragons, and they all tried to hatch dragon eggs, likely to fulfill their family's power once Aegon's dream came true. Also, Maester Aemon, Rhaegar, Daenerys, and Jon Snow are all Targaryens who were either super into the Prince That Was Promised lore from Aegon's dream, or are potential fulfillments of Aegon's prophecy, the Targaryens that must unite the realm against the cold threat of the others. At the current point of A Song of Ice and Fire, 300 years after Aegon's conquest, his dream is coming true. Aegon's descendants, Daenerys and Jon, will have to unite the living to defeat the dead. So that's what Aegon the Conqueror was up to before he did his conquering. Born near the end of the Century of Blood, he wed both of his sisters, visited Westeros as a boy, became a dragon rider, burned down some Valyrian posers, and had a spooky dream that defined his family's legacy. Let me know in the comments who is your favorite Targaryen. It's Daemon, isn't it?
Very good.
That blasted crime hoodie. Thanks for watching.